Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
It was my 42nd birthday, and I spent it alone in my Denver apartment with a single cupcake from the grocery store bakery, the kind with too much frosting and a plastic flower stuck on top like an afterthought. Something meant to cheer you up, but instead just reminds you how alone you really are. I lit a candle I found in the junk drawer, the kind that smells faintly of old cinnamon and melted frustration, and for a second, I sat there in silence, waiting, just waiting for my phone to buzz. It didn't. Not a single call. Not a text. Not even a lazy Facebook notification from someone who'd forgotten I existed until the app reminded them. I checked the time, hoping maybe someone had just gotten caught up in work. It was already after 8. My birthday had been going for 20 hours, and not one person in my family had remembered. My mom, who once threw Melanie a spa weekend for passing her driver's test, nothing. My dad, who used to forward me tax articles like it was a love language, not a word. And Melanie, forget it. The last time she texted me, she asked if I could cash app her like $20 for an Uber because my card's acting up and I was stupid enough to do it. I tried to laugh it off, the way I always did, telling myself I was being dramatic, that adults don't really do birthdays anyway, right? We work, we go home, we drink something with too much sugar or alcohol, we move on. But deep down, I felt it crack, this cold, slow fissure across my chest that had been growing for years, finally splitting into something undeniable. I wasn't forgotten because people were busy. I was forgotten because I was convenient to forget. I'm the older daughter, the reliable one, the one who figured out FAFSA forms without help, who took the bus to job interviews in the rain, who drove 4 hours to take mom to her physical therapy appointments when dad couldn't get off the golf course. I was the fixer. The plug. The emotional landfill where everyone dumped their problems. And every time I needed something, a hug, a thank you, just basic damn acknowledgement, I got a shrug and a, you know we appreciate you, right? That's it. That's all I got. Appreciation by implication. But Melanie? She could call crying about getting banned from Delta for cussing out a gate agent, and 2 days later, she'd be posting pictures of her and mom drinking mimosas at brunch like nothing happened. She was chaos, dressed up in glitter and fake eyelashes, and everyone ate it up. She was the storm they all protected, while I was the bunker they hid in. I took a bite of the cupcake, too sweet and too dry, and opened Instagram just to distract myself from the pity party I didn't even want to attend. That's when I saw it. The post. There they were, Mom, Dad, and Melanie, standing in front of the Eiffel freaking Tower, smiling like they were in a toothpaste commercial. Champagne in their hands, party hats on their heads, and the caption read, "Happy birthday to the most fabulous daughter a family could ask for. Hashtag Mel in Paris, hashtag family first, hashtag Paris is always a good idea." I swear, my heart didn't even break. It just went still, like someone had flipped a switch and turned off the whole damn building. They hadn't just forgotten my birthday. They'd flown Melanie to Paris for hers. They were literally in another country, throwing her a party on the same day they didn't even send me a damn emoji. Not even a thumbs up. And before you think maybe it was a coincidence, let me be very clear. Our birthdays are 4 days apart. 4 freaking days. They booked an international trip that included my birthday and didn't even pretend to care. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the heart button, not sure if I wanted to scream or laugh or throw my phone across the room. I zoomed in on the photo. Dad was holding a little sign that said "Birthday Girl." Mom had on a beret. Melanie was doing that influencer pose like she was selling perfume. And all I could think was, how did I become the extra in my own family? I didn't cry. That surprised me. Normally, I'm the type to cry when I stub my toe or when the dog dies in a movie. But that night? I didn't shed a single tear. I sat there, cupcake half-eaten, candle still flickering in a drafty room, and I felt something cold and clear settle into my chest. This wasn't just forgetting a birthday. This was erasure. This was them saying, without saying, that I was just a background character in the story they wanted to tell the world. And I decided something right then, something I had never said out loud, not even to myself. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to guilt trip anyone or send some long, dramatic text about how hurt I was. I wasn't going to post a cryptic quote on social media or leave passive-aggressive comments on their pictures. No, that's what Melanie would do. I had something better in mind. That night, I decided I wasn't going to scream or cry. I was going to disappear. And they wouldn't see it coming. There's something about betrayal that doesn't hit all at once. Not like a slap or a car crash or a spilled glass of red wine. It comes in waves, soft at first, almost like a memory, and then sharper, louder, until it's all you can hear in your own damn head. That's how it was for me, waking up the morning after my birthday, if you can call it that, with a stale cupcake wrapper on the counter and the glow of that ridiculous Eiffel Tower post still burning behind my eyelids like an afterimage I couldn't blink away. I stood in the kitchen barefoot, drinking cold coffee straight from the mug I forgot to rinse out, and all I could think about was how long this had actually been happening. Not just the forgetting. The erasing. The rewriting of our whole family script with me as the boring, stable one who didn't need anything but was always expected to give. I used to believe that love and fairness weren't always the same thing. That being the oldest meant you took the heavier load because you were strong enough to carry it. That being the responsible one was a badge of honor. But now, at 42, standing in silence while the people who made me pretended I didn't exist, I realized I had confused responsibility with disposability. They didn't cherish me because they could rely on me. They relied on me because they knew I wouldn't make noise when they walked all over me. I started thinking back, way back, to the times I should have said something but didn't. I put myself through college working 2 part-time jobs, bartending, until 2 a.m. on Fridays and tutoring high school math during the day, while Melanie spent 7 years trying to find her passion. She changed majors 3 times, blew through 2 semesters abroad, and still graduated late, with a 3.2 GPA and a custom-printed graduation banner my parents had made for the backyard. I didn't even get a dinner when I finished school. No, scratch that. I think Mom heated up leftover chili and said, "You always were a go-getter." Like that was supposed to be a compliment and not a code word for we didn't bother. Then there was Mom's hip surgery 5 years ago. I took time off work, unpaid, mind you, flew home, stayed with her for 2 weeks, cooked meals, changed the sheets, even helped her shower. Melanie? She sent flowers. Expired ones. With a card that said, "Stay strong, Queen." I was the one scrubbing surgical tape off our mother's skin while Melanie was taking selfies on a damn beach in Cabo, talking about how healing isn't linear. And still, for some reason, they called me cold when I didn't want to FaceTime during Melanie's latest vision board reveal. They said I needed to be more present. Like I wasn't already the only one keeping this broken machine running with duct tape and burnout patients. I remember once I calculated how much I spent supporting them, hospital bills, groceries, emergency flights, rent money for Melanie when she lost her card again. It was at least 30 grand a year for over 5 years. That's like almost $100,000 total. I looked at the spreadsheet again this morning and just shook my head. There it was in black and white, my own quiet self-betrayal, documented down to the last Uber. But that's the thing about math. It tells the truth, even when you don't want to hear it. So that morning, still staring at the Eiffel Tower post like it owed me an apology, I started my plan. Not a loud one. Not the kind that involves dramatic phone calls or teary confrontations. Just quiet subtractions. One by one. First, I removed myself from the family group chat. No explanation. Just gone. Then, I canceled the auto transfer that sent Melanie $100 a month, just in case. I changed the Netflix password, took my name off Mom and Dad's Costco account, and opened a separate savings account they didn't know existed. I stopped picking up their calls right away. Started letting them leave voicemails, and most of the time, I didn't call back. When I did, my tone was flat, polite, distant. No emotion, no investment. I was practicing the art of being forgettable. And you know what? I think they finally noticed. It was funny at first. No one said a thing. Not a word about the missed calls or the ghosting. That's the part that hurt the most, maybe. How easy it was for them to go without me. But around week 3, the messages started coming. Mom sent a blurry photo of a flower arrangement with no context. Dad forwarded a New York Times article about burnout. Melanie sent a selfie with a caption that just said, "Hey sis, you good?" And I didn't answer. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't interested in performing for people who only noticed when I disappeared. I wasn't interested in playing the big sister therapist/bank/silent sufferer role anymore. I didn't want applause or revenge or pity. I just wanted silence. A silence of my own choosing. A space where I could finally breathe. By the end of the week, I had gone 5 full days without a single word to any of them. And it felt like pulling glass out of my skin, painful, but necessary. Cleansing, even. They thought I'd always be there. That I was too loyal, too predictable to walk away. But I was done being the invisible scaffolding for their messy, self-centered lives. This wasn't a tantrum. This wasn't revenge. This was the beginning of my silent plan. And they wouldn't even realize it until it was too late. There's a strange kind of power that creeps in when you stop explaining yourself, when you stop apologizing for your absence, when you simply decide that your time, your energy, your sanity are no longer available on demand like some family loyalty subscription that everyone else keeps using but no one pays for. At first, the silence felt unnatural, like I was holding my breath underwater, counting down the seconds until my lungs gave out. But as the days turned into weeks, it stopped feeling like punishment and started feeling like peace, heavy, still, honest peace. I didn't announce anything because I knew better. If I dared to speak the truth, even once, if I'd said, "You've treated me like a backup plan for so long I don't even know who I am without your problems to fix," they would have called me dramatic. Or worse, selfish. Because in my family, needing space meant you were mentally unstable, and asking for fairness meant you were ungrateful. So instead of making some grand speech or writing a flowery email, I just started making quiet exits in every corner of my life. I stopped sending updates about work, even though I knew my mom liked to brag to her friends about how her older daughter's in finance or something. I stopped forwarding Melanie job listings, even though she never followed through on any of them. I let texts sit for hours, sometimes days. I started answering like a stranger would. Cool, sounds good. Hope it goes well. Dry. Minimal. Controlled. I learned the art of the soft fade. Not ghosting out of cruelty, but out of necessity. Like putting distance between you and the fire because you're tired of smelling like smoke. One of the first things I did was open a new bank account in a credit union across town, one they wouldn't know to check. I set up a small auto transfer from my regular checking account and told myself that this sliver of financial autonomy was my exit door if things ever got truly unbearable. I looked at that balance every morning like it was a little flame I was keeping alive in secret. Something only mine. Then I went after the bills. I had been covering an extra phone line on my Verizon plan for years. Melanie's, of course. It started as a favor when she was between gigs, and somehow it just never stopped. I called the provider, waited through the hold music, and cut it off with a quick, cold, "Just remove that number from my plan, thanks." No warning to her. No explanation. Just gone. A tiny move that felt like cutting a leash I hadn't realized was around my neck. That same week, Mom texted me asking if I could help figure out their flight to Florida in March, some retirement cruise thing they had going on. I stared at the screen for a full minute before replying with just 3 words. "Sorry, I can't." No reasons. No guilt. Just a no that stood by itself like a bouncer at the door to my life. Dad called 3 days later, his tone all chipper and forced, pretending he didn't know something had shifted. He asked if I'd be coming home for Thanksgiving. I said, Not this year, and let the silence stretch on the line until he mumbled something about, well, maybe Christmas then, and hung up. They noticed, and they didn't like it. It started subtly at first. My mother sent me an email with the subject line, checking in, but the body was just a forwarded recipe for squash soup. My dad sent me a political cartoon he thought was funny, one of those attempts at casual contact that's meant to bait you into normalcy again. I didn't bite. I just let it sit. The void between us started to feel like a living thing, growing with every unanswered ping and missed call. And then, as expected, Melanie broke the silence the way she always did, loud, messy, and emotionally clueless. She sent me a voice message late one night, her voice coated in whine and irritation, starting with, "So I don't know what your deal is," and ending, after 2 minutes of rambling blame, with, "It's not our fault you're bitter and alone. Grow up." That was the moment I knew my silence had spoken louder than any fight ever could. They were rattled. They were squirming. Because I wasn't playing anymore. I wasn't showing up to make everything easier, wasn't smoothing over their messes, wasn't jumping at every guilt-ridden breadcrumb they tossed my way. I had become a ghost in their lives, and for once, they were the ones haunted by my absence. I didn't need to scream to be heard. I just needed to vanish a little more each day, and let them feel what it was like to live without their invisible daughter cleaning up behind them. They thought I'd break by now, thought I'd crack under the weight of guilt and family obligation. But what they didn't understand is that I had been carrying all of it, every unspoken resentment, every financial burden, every dismissed need, for decades. And when you finally stop lifting a load that was never yours to begin with, what breaks isn't you, it's the illusion they built around you. And I was more than ready to watch that illusion collapse, one quiet piece at a time. There's a moment in every storm where the wind stops just long enough for you to wonder if the worst of it is over or if it's just catching its breath, ready to come back louder and more destructive than before. That's exactly how it felt the first few weeks after I went quiet, when the dust of my disappearance had barely settled and the family machine started making that strange grinding noise of something trying to function without a critical part. I could feel the disturbance through every unanswered voicemail and every just checking in text with 3 question marks and a prayer emoji that I knew wasn't really about checking in, it was about control. About pulling me back into orbit so they didn't have to look too closely at how far they'd pushed me away in the first place. It didn't take long for the guilt campaign to begin in full force. My mom sent me an email that was almost poetic in its passive aggression, starting with "I hope you're well, though we wouldn't know," and ending with a gentle reminder that life is too short to hold grudges. She attached an old photo of me and Melanie at Christmas, the one where I'm holding the camera and she's holding the gift I paid for, the frame just tight enough to make it look like we were both happy. My dad followed up with a voicemail that started with, "Hey, kiddo," like he hadn't just ignored my birthday a year ago, and continued with a story about how his friend's daughter had moved to another state and didn't speak to them anymore, and how family is everything in the end, you know? Then came the Facebook posts. My mother, who barely knows how to use a keyboard without hunting and pecking, suddenly became very prolific in her use of vague, inspirational quotes. Resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Forgiveness doesn't excuse their behavior. It prevents their behavior from destroying your heart. All posted at odd hours, always accompanied by scenic photos of lighthouses or wilted roses. My Aunt Linda even messaged me saying she saw my mom crying at church, which I found interesting because the only thing Mom usually cried about in church was the air conditioning being too high. Claire, my friend and occasional therapist by default, told me this was all to be expected. She said, "When you stop playing the role they cast you in, they accuse you of ruining the show." And she was right. My absence wasn't just inconvenient, it was threatening. I had always been the predictable one, the helper, the buffer between my sister's chaos and my parents' denial. Without me in place, the gears started to grind. And instead of self-reflection, they reached for the oldest tool in the family toolbox, manipulation dressed up like concern. What really took me by surprise was the way they started reaching out to people around me. It started with a vague email to my coworker that she forwarded to me with a raised eyebrow, something about wanting to make sure Erica's okay and let her know we're thinking of her. Then came a message to my college roommate from a Facebook account my dad hadn't touched since 2011. And the final straw, the one that made my stomach turn, was a text from my ex-boyfriend Ben, who I hadn't spoken to in over a year, telling me that my sister had reached out to him because the family was worried about you. That's when I realized they weren't just missing me, they were hunting me down like I was some lost dog who'd slipped her leash. But I held firm. I didn't respond, didn't flinch, didn't explain. Every time I felt that old urge to fix it, to smooth the edges, to ease their discomfort, I reminded myself of that Eiffel Tower photo, of my bare apartment, of the silence on my birthday while they clinked glasses on another continent. I reminded myself that this wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming my own damn peace. Then, almost exactly 1 year to the day since they forgot my birthday, Melanie showed up at my job. It was a Thursday. I was wrapping up a client meeting, sipping burnt office coffee and nodding along as someone made a joke about Q4 reports, when I saw her standing outside the glass conference room with a cluster of cheap balloons and a smug expression that made my blood run cold. She was wearing a tight pink dress like she was going to brunch, and in her hand was a small cake from some overpriced bakery downtown, the box tied with a shiny ribbon. I excused myself politely, heart-pounding, and stepped into the hallway where she was already waving like we were best friends who just happened to bump into each other. "Happy birthday, sis," she chirped, loud enough for 3 coworkers to hear. "I figured I'd surprise you this year since, we kinda missed it last time." I stared at her, not moving, not smiling, feeling the heat of embarrassment crawling up my neck. A few heads poked around cubicle corners, curious about the spectacle. Melanie didn't seem to care. She handed me the cake like it was a peace treaty, and I didn't even look inside. "You came to my job," I said slowly, my voice steady but low. She blinked, clueless. "Well, yeah, you weren't answering, and I just thought," I cut her off. "Is this supposed to erase a decade of being treated like backup luggage?" I asked, loud enough this time for the whole floor to hear. The silence that followed was deafening. Melanie's smile faltered, her hand still frozen midair, holding the cake like it might bite her. I turned and walked away without another word, the kind of walk you don't come back from. I didn't look back to see her face or the reactions of my coworkers. I didn't care. Because in that moment, I wasn't the fixer or the forgotten daughter or the one who had to hold everything together anymore. I was done dancing, and it was their turn to stumble without me. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who writes a letter they know won't be read the way it's meant to be read, the kind of letter that's not designed to open a conversation, but to close a door so completely it might as well be welded shut. But after that surreal moment at my workplace, standing in front of my sister and her balloons like some absurd Hallmark ambush, I knew I had one final thing left to say, and I didn't want to say it with my voice. Because I'd spent most of my life speaking in ways that made everyone else comfortable while I choked on the words I never said. So I wrote instead. Calmly. Clearly. Not a rant. Not a scream. Just the truth, printed in black ink on plain white paper, without exclamation marks, without dramatics, just fact after fact like the weight of a ledger being balanced at last. I sat down at my desk on a quiet Sunday, the same desk where I'd worked remote through 2 years of pandemic stress, where I'd paid bills late at night while Melanie was partying on borrowed money, where I'd once tried to write a novel but gave up because life kept interrupting with someone else's emergency. This time, I didn't let anything stop me. I opened a blank document, and I started typing not from anger, but from clarity, from a place of exhaustion so pure it had turned into something clean. I didn't start with Dear Mom and Dad because they hadn't earned that tone. I started with numbers. Exact ones. I itemized every transfer, every gift, every just until next month payment that never got repaid. I attached screenshots from my banking app, timestamps from old Venmo transactions, copies of receipts from grocery trips I'd made when they were just too busy to help during Mom's recovery. I even found the email thread from the year Melanie needed emergency rent money and swore she'd pay me back in 2 months. That was 6 years ago. Never saw a dime. I wrote out the things that couldn't be attached in JPGs or PDFs, the birthdays skipped, the silence after my promotions, the time they left me out of the family cruise because they thought you probably wouldn't want to go anyway. I reminded them in plain language of the times I'd stayed quiet to keep the peace, of the favors that were never acknowledged, of the way they always used the word independent when what they really meant was we don't have to worry about her. Then, in the last paragraph, I wrote something I'd never had the nerve to say out loud, even in my loneliest moments. The love I gave you is real. But the love you gave me had conditions. And I've finally decided I don't accept those terms anymore. I printed the letter, folded it with slow hands, and slid it into a padded envelope. I included a USB drive with all the screenshots, labeled for your records. On top of everything, I placed a single yellow sticky note with 7 words that said more than any speech I could give. This was the cost of your silence. I mailed it certified, return receipt requested, just to make sure they got it. The explosion didn't take long. My mom called the next evening, her voice breaking into sobs before I even hit play on the voicemail. She said things like, "I didn't know you felt this way," and "How could you do this to your family?" and that classic line every manipulative person saves for when their victim finally walks away, "You changed." My dad emailed instead, because of course he did, and said I had deeply wounded my mother and that I'd gone too far, that airing private family matters in such a calculated way was disrespectful and vindictive. No mention of the content. Just outrage over the delivery. And Melanie? She didn't call. She didn't text. But the next morning, she posted a black and white selfie on Instagram with a caption that said, "Some people just love playing the victim." Not me. No names, no tags, but I knew. Everyone who knew us knew. That post wasn't about her own piece. It was her version of a punch. But here's the thing, none of it touched me the way it used to. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the familiar pull to explain or defend myself or apologize for finally saying something out loud. I didn't feel triumphant either. I felt quiet, empty in a way that felt more like stillness than sadness. Like standing in a room that used to be full of noise and realizing you can hear your own breathing again. Some people call it going no contact. Others call it cutting out the poison. I call it choosing peace. Not the Instagram version of peace with candles and tea and yoga, real peace. The kind where you stop waiting for an apology and stop trying to earn a seat at a table that's been tilted against you from the beginning. Do I miss them? Sometimes. I miss the idea of family more than the reality. I miss the version of us that only existed in Christmas cards and staged photos. I miss what I hoped they'd become more than what they ever actually were. Do I regret it? Not yet. But ask me again in 5 years. When the air is cleared and the echoes have stopped bouncing off the walls. When the silence has become something permanent instead of just an absence. Maybe I'll regret it then. Maybe I'll soften. Maybe I'll reach out, or maybe they will. Or maybe we'll all just keep living on opposite ends of the same country, pretending we were never as broken as we were. But right now, I'm just learning how to live without dancing to someone else's music. And for once in my life, I don't feel out of step. I feel free.